you hit that button. There's Gina.
It's online.
Yeah, very good. Okay. Are we ready? Oh, good. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to tonight's City of Tumwater Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, April 8th, 2025 at 7 p.m. And the meeting is called to order. I'll start with roll call, like usual. Commissioner Daniel. Great. So Commissioner Edwards.
Here.
Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
Here.
Kotek.
Here.
Mr. Nelson. Here. Mr. Staff.
Here.
Vice Chair Staff. And me, Commissioner Robbins. Great, we have a quorum, everybody's here. Very cool, very cool.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have any changes to our agenda tonight? Yes, okay, good to go. We do have a set of minutes from a few months back, to approve or discuss. Motion? Discussion?
Motion to approve the minutes from June 25th, 2024.
I'll second.
I think that was Commissioner Kotek, second.
It was. Yep.
Thank you. I could tell by the frame lighting up your Zoom window. Great, it's been moved and seconded to approve our minutes from the June 25th, 2024 meeting. Further discussion? All in favor of approving, please say aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? All right, minutes are approved. Great, thanks, everybody. It's just been quite a while.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't even know if
it
they
goes
were
with
right
what
or
we're
not.
talking about.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So I'm glad to have the refresher, yeah.
Mhm.
All right, are there any commissioners' reports? Doing this? Okey doke, not seeing any, let's go to Deputy Director's report. Brad?
Well, thank you for having me back. My understanding was that Eric and Jenna did a great job, which is fine. So, a couple updates since I was gone. Wanted to give you an update as to where we were in the overall update cycle. The climate element is now in for legal review. Also going to be for management team review internally, so that's the next step before you get one more shot at it before it's pulled into the whole ordinance in the fall. Right behind that is lands for public purposes and utilities. Those are both finished legal review and are ready for management team review. We'll get that out by the end of this week. So we're making good progress on that. I'm not making good progress on the housing technical guide. I'm up to 80 pages and we're still struggling trying to figure out the diversity chapter and everything else with it. We just got a report that we're trying to integrate into that. My intent is to finish that by the end of the week and get that into legal review. So by June, or end of May, at your last meeting in May, you'll see the whole housing element, including everything that you saw at your last meeting, including goals and policies, all the updates regarding that, as well as all the background information. Dana and Erica are working on conservation element right now. Hopefully we'll have that ready also for my review and then legal review. Land use will follow all of that, and then transportation. So it's been a lot of work just to get the technical stuff, a lot more than anticipated. But I think we're making good progress. Also wanted to mention on the Habitat Conservation Plan, we're making good progress with U.S. Fish and Wildlife. We're having bi-weekly meetings, 2 weeks having meetings. We're hoping to get a draft, hopefully by mid to late spring, out to the public for the whole HCP, so you can see where we are currently. The intent is that draft will hopefully be ready for NEPA SEPA review, which will, meaning timeline-wise, that's really the driver of the timeline for approval from the service. But we, since we got the congressional representatives involved in late fall, it's been a big turnaround in terms of wanting to work and all that. So that's been a positive. I wasn't sure if you knew that our current director, Mike Matlock, is retiring at the end of May. He said something about 35 years, I'm done. Said you had a contract, and he said I didn't have a contract. Anyway, you get the general gist of things. He's decided to give a notice, and he will be finishing up at the end of May. So if you see him in the hallway, if you have any last messages for him.
Is there a due to send him off?
There will be a department celebration, and I think there will be a small thing on the staff level from the city-wide, but we haven't planned anything larger. He's indicated he's not as excited about it as we might be, so we might have something after he's gone. So we're excited about, we're excited for him, because he has been at the city a long time. More than 3 decades. We're also happy to say that Sam Hunter has joined us as an associate planner in our permit division. So we're hoping, like Alex, to have her come and see you once she's gotten settled. She's now on her 2nd week. Quite excited too. So that means that we have a lot. We're staffed up completely. So yeah, it's a quick snapshot. This is what it looks like when we're staffed up completely. So those are the things that I have.
Yeah, looking forward to meeting that. Sam, what's her name? Yep.
Sam Hunter.
All right, good. Do you want to say anything more about the our meeting schedule, or that it's there?
Just that it's there.
Okay.
It will be relatively stable for the next week or so.
Thank you. I really like these, so yeah, keep them going. It just is a good reminder of kind of what to expect and what progress we're making. All right, let's move to public comment. We have a here. Would you like to address the planning commission in general terms?
Absolutely.
Great. If you could tell us your name and your address, and if you are affiliated with anybody.
My name's Chris Lester. I am a government affairs director with the Thurston County Realtors Association. I do live on the outskirts of Tumwater, so I do pay attention to Tumwater in general, where my kids went to school. I've worked with Brad and Dana the past few years. My contract used to be more council related, and it's been restructured to be more planning commission related. So I've been online a couple of times trying to get here to be in person to introduce myself. So anything housing related, we're here to work with you and help you out and be a partner, community. So that's who I am.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your taking the time to be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll be looking for good brain power.
Happy to help.
Great. Brad, do we have anyone online?
We don't see anyone online, and we didn't get any emails or phone calls.
Well, let's move on to item number 8, our 2025 comprehensive plan, periodic update and land use element. And this is part 1. Anna, or
I will take the lead.
okay.
And correct me as we go through. Erica sends her regrets. She is dealing with a pet-generated emergency at home. Not that her last experience was too rough.
Okay, we didn't scare her too much. Okay.
No, she actually said, "Bring it on."
She's pretty fearless, so yeah.
So just as a quick reminder, I wanted to just remind people of sort of the basic numbers we're planning for as part of this process. And first of all, explain a little bit about the difference between our part 1 of the land use element and part 2 of the land use element. Part one is intended really to be the pull off the shelf as often as possible policy-related document for your use as the planning commission, council's use, and also the community's use. So with that in mind, readability, understandability, all of those ability things are very important for us to understand. If you don't understand it, we're in trouble. So that means we need to fix it and make sure we get it to the acceptable.
Do you mind if I butt in just a second? A good litmus test is if you have to read it like twice or more, that's a red flag. Yeah, other people won't take the time. So that's a sentence structure issue.
So again, part two is the technical side, which is essentially showing our work for how growth will be accommodated in particular zones and all this. And just to let you know a little bit of background information, we've been working with Commerce we did the housing allocation process in 23 and 24. We did the land capacity analysis to show that we had sufficient land for housing. Following that process, Commerce during that time issued another update to their guidance, and they found that our original process wasn't up to their standards, or they changed the standards, and we had to redo it. So after making some changes to that, we now have an updated land capacity analysis that's available. I provide you if you would like to see that. I would hold off until you see the whole land use element. But there was another important element that Commerce had changed their guidance on in November that we didn't know about, and that was doing a land capacity analysis specifically for emergency housing, transitional housing, all of those things, essentially from getting somebody off the street into some form of shelter through a little bit of process on a temporary basis before they enter some supportive permanent housing. Commerce has said that we essentially had to run the numbers to show that we had adequate land in the city to accommodate potential range of uses and the beds needed for that. And so we had to enter into another contract with PRPC to do that work. They came back with the results at the end of March. We're in good shape. In fact, all the jurisdictions in Thurston County are in good shape. This is what we needed to do. So with that information, we're now able to say, cross your fingers, we have everything we need to actually finish work on the technical guidance. And that is Dana's work after she finishes on the conservation 611. If anybody wants to be a transportation engineer, I'd like to offer the position. We're still looking for qualified candidates. It's tough. So if you notice, then I'm not joking when I say if you know of somebody who's looking for a career change and would find working at the city of Tumwater, we'd be more than happy to. Numbers we're planning for, again, there are three sets. On the housing side, we went through the housing allocation process with Commerce to arrive at these numbers. Essentially, the state gave each of the counties a base number to start off with, and then within each of the counties, there was a process that the jurisdictions arrived at through consensus to divvy up the numbers. So this is the overall housing units needed from 2020 to 2045, a little bit over 9,000 new units. That number, again, is broken down further, and I think you touched on that as part of the housing discussion. We'll get into more details about how that looks. But that number has importance in terms of the types of land uses that we're going to be looking at. Because there is such a large need for housing for those who are under 80% AMI, area median income, that means there's a type of housing that is more likely to be suitable for that group, multifamily, than single-family detached, for example, which has land use implications. So we're really going to be probably shifting the way the city looks over time. We're definitely going to be shifting the way the land use is going to look over time to reflect that. That doesn't answer the question of who's actually going to build that and how that's going to be paid for. Because currently the private market can't build that because there's no way to earn a profit, there's no way to do it out of the goodness of their hearts, so we can't rely on that. And public side requires a lot of money to do that as well, just to build new projects. So It's a larger question to be addressed. We looked at household size from the 2020 census as sort of a good estimate of how we could use the housing numbers to derive our population estimate. The Thurston Regional Planning Council did the original estimates back in 2018 for population. We think they undercount based on what the state is saying we're going to be expecting in terms of housing. And so we decided to use the most recent census number of people per household, which is 2.39. And the interesting thing is, well, since the 1970s, it had been declining at a fairly steep rate, from slightly under 3 to down to about 2.2 in 2010. It actually has started to go back up again for a variety of reasons, I think. Economic, larger households, all those kinds of things are now coming back. So we think it's probably a pretty good way to estimate what the population would be in 2045. So again, because we're trying to plan for both the city and our urban growth area at the same time, our population and our housing numbers reflect numbers for both the city itself and the urban growth area. When we did the original housing allocation process, we had divided out, this is what the urban growth area is going to get, and this is what the city is going to get. And then we looked at the results and said, that doesn't make a lot of sense, because we're going to dump all this new housing on the very edge of the city and then have, maybe 2/3 more in the city itself. And that didn't make sense, because if you're trying to plan for transit, all these other things, it makes much more sense to look to plan towards the centers. So with that in mind, we're going to be looking at both of those areas as part of this planning process. The employment estimates are the number of jobs. This is from 2017, so obviously a few things have happened in the intervening 8 years to this estimate, but this is the best we have. And it's also, we have our employment forecast from that's calling for an additional 10,000 jobs by 45 as well from TRPC. What kind of jobs those are, where they are located, house, or in an office building, or what, is still kind of up for decision, I think. However, I think it's sufficient for us to use for planning purposes going forward. So with that in mind, I would like to make sure if you had any questions on any of that.
I'm just wondering if there, in the census itself, the census data itself, if there aren't more current employment estimates or even population.
Yes and no. So the census has its annual census every 10 years, and then does what's known as the American Community Survey on an annual basis. And we get those updated numbers. They're through 23 right now, because I think the 23 numbers were released at the end of 24. And that's what we've been using for the housing planning, and what Ann and I will be using for the land use updates as well. The data comes with a lot of margin of error, especially for smaller jurisdictions. So I'm still inclined to use the TRPC numbers for that. Well, the housing numbers are set. Population numbers, I'm pretty confident. I like using the housing to drive the population. Employment, there's such a wide range. When I looked at the stuff in the census materials, I'm not comfortable necessarily using in place of the forecast.
Does there have to be just one number as the bookend, the target, or can it be a range?
That's a good question.
Because, there's a lot of variability.
Yeah.
Possible.
For housing, it's one number. You have an X number of units, we've been allocated, plan for X number of units. Population and employment are a little more flexible. In my mind, population should be relatively static, because you're going to be driving a lot of, 1 per 1,000 staffing decisions based on that kind of thing. So my preference would be to use one number for the population. For the employment side, I don't necessarily think we have that kind of one-to-one matchup, so we do have flexibility. It's just making sure that we have sufficient commercial and industrial lands, which I think will be fine on to accommodate whatever the population range might be. So similar to the structure of the housing element, for the goals and policies. The introduction starts off explaining the purpose of it, explaining what each of the parts do, and it also explains a little more in detail about how to read the element. Structure is very similar to the housing material that you looked at last time. The difference is, unlike the housing element, where you only dealt with one GMA goal, land use touches everything. And so each of the 15 goals are addressed in this chapter in terms of what the land use element addresses and the reason why. So, for example, dealing with urban growth and reducing sprawl, all those things that we talk about by having compact urban development, having urban versus rural development, all those kinds of things play into it as part of the land use element development. Transportation obviously is important because if you have no way to connect the various land uses, nothing works. So we have to acknowledge and provide a little bit of support of the land use element to what's going on in the transportation plan and vice versa. Housing, same thing. We're driving intensities and densities of residential development as part of the housing element, but it's also feeding into what we do for the land use designations and the land use element. It's also, as I mentioned, it starts to change the complexion of the housing types that we're going to be allowed in the city. So that also plays a role in land use and also will play a role when we get into more detail on the development code. What you've seen so far on middle housing is very much the direction kind of going. On other things like economic development, property rights, permitting, and so forth, land use does touch on these things in a variety of ways. I'll let you read these sections on your own. Please read through this again. If, as Dana said, if it's not clear, don't think it's your issue, it's our issue. We need to make sure that it's understandable to them.
And if there's a different way to lay it out that would be more clear, feel free to please let us know.
Similar to the discussion on the Growth Management Act, we cover a lot more ground when we deal with the countywide planning policies. The countywide planning policies, again, are sort of the translation of the Growth Management Act down to the county level, and basically it's the how-to guide to comprehensive planning within the structure of the county. What it is also is a way for each of the comprehensive plans in the county to talk to each other. So when we say we are planning for the city and our urban growth area, that urban growth area and how we deal with it is defined in the countywide planning policies. Also, if we have outside influences, like say traffic generated by Olympia or vice versa, there's all that is dealt with as part of the countywide planning policies. It also plays a role, obviously, the development of the land use element. So we've included that discussion in this section. Similar to the housing element, we've broken down the element goals. There are 14 different goals because the land use covers such a broad range, again, of different topics. But we try to group them in like patterns. So the first set of 3 goals deal with growth management goals in general. First goal is ensuring the land use element is implementable and coordinated with other city neighboring jurisdictional regions. Essentially, we don't plan in a vacuum. We have to account for all these other things as we're planning and to communicate with the other jurisdictions as we're planning on what's happening. For example, we've been getting constant updates from Olympia and Thurston County on where they are in their plans. We're getting their drafts of their elements as well. We've been providing comments back and forth on both of those fronts. Second goal is ensuring development occurs in an orderly and cost-efficient manner to utilize available land and public services, protect natural resources, protect and enhance critical areas and open space, address equity and climate change, and reduce sprawl. Some big things that have been added since the last time we did this in 2016. Obviously, the climate change is a new required state element. The enhancing open space is another new thing. No longer are we just required to protect, we also need to have some provisions for enhancing existing critical areas as part of the process. So we're trying to do a lot of things in one goal. So as you read through these and you start to wonder, is this all possible within one goal, or do we need to figure out another way to do it? We're more than happy to talk through how that might look. So, again, these are our, we've come to the Planning Commission in 23 to sort of explain what the current comprehensive plan said. In 24, we started to go through some proposed changes to the goals and policies based on direction that we were getting from state guidance, based on directions that we were getting from dealing with diversity and equity and other considerations, language that we were using, focuses that we had, those kinds of things.
Comments from the community survey.
And things from the community survey and the open houses that we've been having. So now this is sort of the second or third cycle through of things. And now that you've heard and seen what the climate element is doing, what the housing element is doing, and so forth, please, I'm asking you, of course, to remember the 50-page documents for both of those. But now is the time we start to think about, does this all connect together? Or does it create conflicts? If it creates a conflict, we need to figure out how to resolve that. Or identify it as a conflict and say, here's the next things that we need to do in order to deal with this. Because each of the 15 Growth Management Act goals are not necessarily in harmony. Protecting the environment while having economic development and so forth and so on will set up its own conflicts. But how we deal with that is the important part of this. Lastly, the goal here is ensuring adequate public services, facilities, and utilities are available for proposed and existing development. This is sort of a fundamental part of the land use element. It's saying if we say we want commercial development here, that means we have gone through the process of establishing what the pre-existing, what needs to be in place for that to happen. Utility services, transportation, all that kind of thing needs to be part of that before we can say, yes, you can build here. So, any questions on sort of that first grouping of goals?
And with the folks online, any questions or remarks?
No questions from me. None from me either.
The next set of 3 goals deal with equitable community goals. And first of all, they cover kind of a broad range, but they're intended to be bring in some things that were part of the 26 element, but are much more prominent now as part of this process. The first is making sure that we create land use patterns that increase the availability of affordable housing for all income groups. So we have an equity issue there to make sure that we're not just building one kind of housing, we're not doing, just to meet population housing.
We want to make sure too that housing is distributed throughout, and I think we talked about this at the last meeting, where we don't want to create districts where we only have middle housing in one area. We want middle housing across, and so planning for that.
Can I bring a concrete example in and then ask you what the process was for approval of that? And I think it helps me put it into this document better.
Yeah.
So those of us that use like Walmart and that whole area can't help but miss all of the development that's going on along the. So you have apartments clearly that are going for at least 3-story, maybe 4-story.
There's a 5-story.
5-story. You already have pretty congested traffic all around that area. I mean, that big circle is finally done, but it still doesn't mean that Little Rock, in that little corridor there, isn't going to be dramatically impacted. So in order for that approval for all of that development, they went through the current land use ordinances, permits, and all of that. And in doing that, then did they look at things like the affordable housing and the equity? Is there like a check sheet that is done that?
At the time that those were probably approved in the Fred Meyer, I can speak from my own experience because I was on the other side as a private consultant putting together that application. That was in 1997 though. So, at that time, it was a lot, equity wasn't part of the equation.
No, not.
Affordable housing wasn't part of the equation. So it was truly a matter of saying, okay, this area of the city, we need retail that has lots of parking. Or we need to allow for space for, you know, users of that sort. And that was kind of the extent of the commercial planning, because I'm being a little,
Simple.
I'm being a little facetious there, but the important part about those bigger boxes is they drive a lot of the revenue for the city in terms of what paying for police and fire and everything else. And one of the considerations was we need to figure out revenue sources, services that support other things that may not generate the revenue to support those things. Single-family housing is always a good example. That doesn't necessarily pay for itself. So at that time, that wasn't part of the equation. It did evolve over time, though. And in fact, there was, when they added the provisions for allowing the 5-story residential in our general commercial zone, which is sort of the highest intensity, most car-centric, all those kinds of things, the thought was, okay, we need to start evolving these areas into slightly more mixed-use areas, allowing slightly more chances for people living nearby to access these things without getting into a car. All of those kinds of things were in the background. Economics, however, said that nobody wanted to build 5-story multifamily in those spaces. And the focus of those areas was still very much, we want commercial development of a car-centric kind of thing. The market changed dramatically after 2020 in terms of how things were shifted. Things that we thought were no way, this isn't going to happen. We were getting a lot of the 5-story apartment buildings or things. That's primary example number one. And in fact, the commission considered some small tweaks to the code to change that around to focus more on less the height for particular residential uses and more the fact that those residential uses were mixed use, meaning that you could provide 80% of building space housing and the rest could be commercial, because we wanted to preserve the general commercial for primarily commercial uses. But there's been an evolution as we've been going through. Now, transition from policy to code to somebody saying, yes, I can build that, took a while. It's probably about 15 years between that, going into the code, to the time that somebody actually built it. So unfortunately, I can't say that if we make a change today to this, that you're going to see that in the next 3 to 5 years. So it will take a little time. Sometimes it will happen much faster than we anticipated. Sometimes we may have a small thing called a recession, those kinds of things. We'll just have to.
Well, and not all those changes happen because we changed the code, right? There's a larger cultural shift that we can't plan for or predict. So because of the cultural shift, our code was open to allow that to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually kind of in the background. Here's a flip side to that. So we allowed residential uses in general commercial. We also allow commercial uses right now in single family on a very limited scale. You can build a 10,000 square foot, some square footage in any single family zone right now. No one has picked up on that and said, I can make money doing it yet. Because building is such a small scale commercial it's expensive. We're building everything you'll need for a much bigger facility, but in a much smaller space, and that you have to have something that generates enough income to pay off all the costs of development. But our code allows for that kind of flexibility, and that's another thing that we're really looking at is what other ways can we sort of, in addition to middle housing, is sort of expand what mixed use, what mixture of uses could occur in the various zones in the city.
That's helpful. A newbie question.
No, they're good
I
questions.
think that's a great,
Yeah.
thing, because, I mean, it points, I mean, your question really is, tees up that little magic crystal ball that we collectively are looking into to try to make some good decisions or recommend good decisions, and still allow for, the city to adapt to whatever is ahead. So, yeah. That, I mean, you know, it's kind of, we'll be back at this again too with the update of the comprehensive plan in whatever number of years is the requirement, although we can update and amend anytime, yeah, if necessary, right?
Mhm.
But, you know, it's an ever-changing thing, that we have to kind of
That's
navigate.
just such a startling difference
Right.
that's happening right now. Interesting that that was forethought
Percolated.
15 years ago.
Mhm.
Yep.
We're all going, what?
Yeah.
Well, the start was a redevelopment. You went from a hotel with plenty of parking to Fred Meyer with plenty of parking. I mean, that was a no-brainer. It was commercial to commercial, so, I mean, it was, there didn't need to be any new ordinances to build it. That's what started the whole thing.
Well, the phone. Fred Meyer used to be a hotel?
Used to be the Tyee.
Where?
Tyee, it was a resort. It had the golf course and,
I used to come over from Yakima for conferences.
You're pulling my leg.
Right.
Oh, my
no.
God. All right.
Well, that's serious.
No, it was a, I don't wanna say a destination, it was a close to a destination place for Tumwater. It was definitely something that if you came to the Olympia area, you knew about. It wasn't just an
Oh, wow.
off the freeway kind of thing. It was much more than just,
One of the few places
Wow.
state agencies could have a conference.
That's right.
yep.
Wow.
They had conference facilities that the state used on a regular basis.
Thank you.
Which is, I guess, another angle on things, you know, that's the kind of destination opportunities, recreation that are not necessarily an employment thing, although that's a component of it, but there's other reasons that people come to Tumwater.
Well, and this leads into, this whole area is lacking convention space in the car. And that's why you have, multiple developments popping up in Olympia, Lacey, Quinault, like, all these different things are popping up because there is such a need. The issue is, now we're gonna see this waiting for all of this space to be built, and all these spaces are gonna be built, and now we need to actually fill those spaces. And hopefully we don't build so much square footage that we then go back into the cycle of, we need to get rid of some of it. So, I think we can fill it, we just have to be creative with it, and we have some really good businesses. So, yeah.
It's, the name of the hotel in Olympia that has changed names about 6 times.
Yeah, the Olympia, whatever.
The
That was the equivalent to the Tyee, was the next place for hosting local conferences. But with that gone, there's nothing.
And we've been turning down business, left and right, that we cannot bring in. And,
we can't change old into a.
well, that's the thing, now they're going to apartments, different things like that. And, I sit on the board for Experience Olympia and beyond, and that's one of our big focuses and conversations is if you come here and use tourism, we need to have these spaces. And if we want sports teams to come, we want all these teams to come, so we need that. And we just keep cutting them and getting rid of them. And we have Great Wolf Lodge that's down the road, it's a little too far out of the way. And then we're gonna have something just a little north, but it'd be great to have something front and center right here.
Right through May.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of people.
Swimming pool.
Legislature.
Swimming pool.
A whole question on Parks and Rec and what happened to the swimming pool, you know.
hotel being built there in Rock and across the street from Walmart, right?
Across the street from Walmart, that 5-story,
Yeah.
that's apartments. Mixed use, it'll be commercial on the first floor, sorry.
Oh, okay. I thought it was gonna be a hotel. I don't know.
And it's,
Oh, no, you're right.
oh,
You're
different one.
thinking of the new commercial next to the home.
Kingswood?
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a smaller hotel. I don't think it has much of the office space.
Oh, okay.
That's going, that is going.
Oh,
Well, thank you. I don't mean to detour you all the time.
this is not a detour. This is
This is what we're here
This
for.
is what we're here for.
making the words real. And however we can do this with the words, because not everyone gets the opportunity to sit down with us.
Well, and you'll see, we'll go through phases where we don't have a lot to talk about or say necessarily, because we are clipping along, but ask questions. Great. They help us all. We all like them. The city likes them too. Brad loves them. Email him at 11 PM, he'll get right back to you.
I have to talk about balance.
I've had that discussion. I also want to just touch on a couple other groupings while again, we started the discussion of specific land uses. There are specific needs for particular land uses, whether they're residential, industrial, or commercial, in terms of space needs, in terms of obviously separation. You don't necessarily want industrial uses immediately next to it, residential of any sort, all those kinds of things. So, and then also as part of that is a acknowledgement that open space as well as developed recreational opportunities are part of that mix, meaning that we need to be thinking about and allocating space for that as we're doing this kind of planning process. Related to that is public facilities. We have talked a little bit about things that the city provides in terms of transportation, in terms of, say, fire and police service, in terms of water, sewer service through lot, those kinds of things. All those things have infrastructure that needs to be thought of and located within the city to support the larger growth area. That means if we're talking about, say, another fire station, or if we're talking about another road here, or those kinds of things. So we need, as part of the land use process, we do that thought process as well. There's also a subset of things called essential public facilities that are required by the state. It's essentially defined as things that everybody needs but nobody wants anywhere near them. And it's your jails, your airports.
Transitional housing.
Yeah. So, as required under state law, we have to provide a process for locating such facilities. In the previous comprehensive plan, this was actually part of our lands for public purposes element. We're going to pull that out of there, put it in the land use element where we think it makes more sense, because again, it's dealing with the type of land use and how that land use interacts with everything else around it. So we'll have that. Also, the related goal about the airport. We have an existing airport in the city. The state has been very clear about that airports shall remain as airports, pending the decision of the port to do something else with it. But we need to make sure that we do what we can to sort of make sure that whatever we propose is compatible with whatever is proposed at the airport. We're also doing a flip side to that, is we're trying to work with the port to ensure that whatever they're proposing is compatible with our residents and all that.
Mm-hmm.
We're dealing with noise impacts and all of that. So it's a two-way street about how we're doing it. It's something we have to plan for, and it's something we have to allow for. And so this is the section that we start to deal with that part of that process. We also have a last goal deals with historic preservation. Obviously, the community was founded on an area that has always been a settled area for many, 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 many years before European settlement. It was obviously a very important point for the starting of European settlement here. So there's a lot of things happening in this location just because, gosh, there was a river going into the sound that was on the end of a long trail coming up from Oregon, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to build that into the land use process.
Mm-hmm.
In general, anything on the broad level that you think are land uses or things dealing with land use that we really aren't addressing as part of this, or things that we're sort of dealing with too many times?
Go ahead, Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
Maybe too early to ask the question, but is it the city council position that we want to have people living in the airport area? Because that's what's reflected in the plan.
The council actually hasn't come out with anything. In fact, we've been talking with the individual council members about potential things dealing with that. it's a balance between what is currently on the ground right now, what has developed over time, and what could potentially happen in the airport in the future that could change what happens underneath the flight, and that kind of thing. So we haven't had that discussion as yet with the council. It is something we're starting to,
This is sort of a gray area that we're maybe asking them to now come up with.
it's, yeah, it really, it becomes a bigger issue as we start to think about what could happen with the airport based on their planning, the kinds of things that could be happening in terms of flights and frequency and all of that. And then start to think about, in our case, we can't necessarily say to a property owner, you can't build here. Because if the impacts are coming from the airport, that's really between the property owner and the airport. However, we also should be thinking in the back of our minds, what things are appropriate uses within those areas and what things probably shouldn't be as allowed as frequently as they had. So we're still really trying to figure that part out ourselves.
I just remember two arguments as we were developing the plan. One was over, whether there should be, multi-use, apartments, within, the area. And the other one was over whether there should be drive-through. We all voted not to have drive-through, immediately have to have the, bank built and a drive-through. So I don't know whether, making decisions, helps or not.
Yeah, one thing that I think we will always say is things will change and we will learn things that we may not have known a year ago, by putting the code in place and seeing what happens. So it's not an issue for us to say, yeah, that might not have been exactly what we wanted, but we can make a change to put us closer to that. We know we're not gonna get everything right. And there will be issues that come up that we don't know about. New uses that come up that we have no idea. But we need to figure out a way. The residents want to use this, we don't want them driving a long distance to do that, all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
Brad, I had a question about, kind of a general, I don't know if it's kind of a method or what, but an opportunity to recognize here where, because Tumwater is not isolated, we have adjacent jurisdictions, several, of, partnership opportunities for things, of one kind or another, where we, potentially figure out cost share agreements, revenue sharing arrangements, what have you, but, somehow figure out, we don't all have to have every single thing, to replicate. We could share, we could partner. I'm wondering how that plays out with land use.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question. I think it has less a role in land use itself, because land use itself is much more localized, much more what's going to happen on the ground. It comes into play more, say, with the housing side, when we're dealing with regional housing issues, like how do we deal with homelessness, how do we deal with affordable housing, and what the importance of dealing with it on a regional level. There is such a need for regional efforts in terms of funding and management and so forth to deal with that kind of issue. It's far beyond the capacity of the city of Tumwater to deal with it. So it makes a lot more sense for us to partner with Thurston County and Olympia and Lacey and Yelm and so forth to come up with ways to address those issues, and also to have a united voice when we're talking with the state or federal representatives. So this is what we're doing, and this is how we're coordinating, how we're efficiently using all these resources for this particular. The other part is that I think in getting at the efficiency side is something that comes into play for lands for public purposes. When we're talking about fire service, and the Regional Fire Authority was sort of an example of, this is probably something we should be thinking about, because we don't all need a hook and ladder truck, or we don't all, specialized equipment of this nature and so forth. It might make sense for us to think about how we could coordinate that a lot.
Well, I'm kind of thinking about in terms of land use, if we did have a partnership or wanted to pursue one for something like the convention center or something like that, it's like, where's it gonna go? You know, that's the land use question. But it's that opportunity then, if you reckon with that you have that partnership to help make it possible, and that's gonna be the designated land use for whatever place it winds up.
I think actually the land use is a lot more general than that, in the sense of, you know, when we're putting together the land use plan, we want to have a level of flexibility of types of uses that could go in this location, and all that could be a fairly wide range of things, everything from, you know, heavily office or commercial with some residential to a convention center. So it's not just, we want a convention center at this location and that's it. It's sort of, a convention center could be located across the board in these locations, and then as part of that thought process, whether it's a convention center or a sports complex or a swimming pool, we look for opportunities for the supporting land uses and the supporting transportation system to support that range of opportunities. The place where I think we could focus more on specifically a convention center or specifically on community center would be the Parks and Rec plan. Economic development plan is definitely something that, you know, here are the things that we think we need to identify as a regional cooperation, and here's how we're going to do it. Those are, I think, the areas where you start to get into specifics about this particular land use versus another kind of land.
I think, yeah, the economic development might be the key. Mr. Staff?
Yeah, I was gonna ask about the digging a hole in the ground and filling with water, aspect and spreading that amongst, all the participants in the area, especially if we are building a community center, that might make sense to have that, but having others pitch in, have it more be not just so localized, but regionalized. If you scroll up just a little bit, I just want to go back to the E right there. So preserves and protects significant historical and cultural sites. Who's determining what's significant and what sites should be protected, and how is the city looking at doing something?
So there's a process. First of all, the city itself has designated historic district. The area around the old brewery, for example, and up to the chutes, all of that is a federally designated area that the city went ahead and applied for and was granted. There are also, within the community, a lot of things that are designated under the state historic preservation. I think over 60 different sites, last I looked at, that are sort of fall into that rubric. There's also the thought of, well, what things in the future we should be thinking about preserving that we're not preserving right now? What should be the process for that? What is the cost-benefit trade-off for the owner of the property? If, you know, we say, if we propose this, what does the owner get, so they can't make any changes to the property, but at the same time, they may have an enhanced value because it remains, that kind of thing. So
that's something the city would purchase,
or have some partnership with another nonprofit, or is there a creative reuse of the property, or, so there's yeah.
Thank you.
It's intended to not just, you know, put a wall around something and say it's preserved. It's also how do we ensure that it's still usable by the community?
Sounds like some permitting and some different, okay, thank you.
Mr. Kirkpatrick?
Will the statement that there's enough land in Tumwater to meet these goals come within this element, or will it come somewhere else?
You have
This
the
is-
introduction? Oh,
Yeah, no, this is it.
okay.
This is,
Somewhere within here, in one of the sections, it will say that the city needs more land, or it does not need more land.
it will be likely, and it will be part of part two, the technical information that we're working on, like the housing element, where we're doing all the calculations and showing our work for how housing of all this types can be built within the city. A very similar exercise is done in the land use to say we have sufficient capacity. That's based in a large part by what TRPC has already produced for us in terms of the region-wide land capacity, saying that you want to do these things, you have sufficient lands to do them now. In our case, we have some different things that have come into play, like a gopher. and how we deal with conservation lands within the urban area and so forth, and what that means in terms of our capacity to build certain things, or what things, you know, intensities of uses might need to change in order to accommodate that growth, so we build up rather than out as much as we haven't done it. But yes, that would be, it's a definite statement we have to make within the plan,
In this element, okay.
within this element.
And the follow-on,
Proof of that.
or consequence of that is that you don't need to annex any more land for a little while, right?
Yeah, actually, it doesn't play into the annexation part.
Or
Um,
enlarging the UGA.
Yeah, yes, that's the key part. It doesn't require a change to the urban growth area. The urban growth area is set by the county as part, and they have a whole process that they go through for that. But the jurisdictions obviously have a role to play in terms of whether we're accommodating growth or not, and whether we can within the existing lands. For our purposes, again, we're planning for not only the city, but also the urban growth area at urban levels. So,
But if there's adequate.
if there's adequate
then
space
there should not
within,
be, or at least the outlook of this plan, the 2045 or 6 horizon, there shouldn't be a need to enlarge the UGA. You know, barring something.
now, of course, what's left out of that discussion actually is part of sort of trying to figure out the land capacity, is a willingness for a property owner to do something with their property.
Mm.
If a property owner sits on 40 acres in Tumwater and says, I don't want to do anything, there's nothing to compel them to do anything. We are not going to force them to, you must develop, or we're going to withhold, you know, charge you more money on taxes or something like that. So there's an element of market choice that comes into play about what lands are going to be developing, what the financials look like to develop particular projects and so forth. Say, the likelihood of having a very large factory complex located within Tumwater is probably fairly minimal because we don't have the acreage to accommodate. For example, you're going to have a lot of fun to try to put together a big enough thing for, say, a pulp mill or something of that nature. So there are some things that are just not going to fit. And as we start to fill up more and more of those things will sort of pop up, meaning that we don't have sufficient space for this, or et cetera, et cetera. It may change the complexion of employment within the city or other things as part of that. But
It's one of the reasons behind how schools get developed outside city boundaries sometimes,
Yep.
because it's cheap, and then the sheer size of parcel
Yep.
it drives that purchase.
so a rough idea of a new high school is about 40 acres, a new elementary school is about 10, and so forth. So you have 10 acres that you could put together, don't include wetlands or gopher habitat, et cetera. It becomes more challenging.
Mm-hmm.
I saw something in here when I read through it about, there was a plan to possibly do one annexation.
Maybe the islands.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that might have been not scrubbed from the.
Yeah, so we are, when, in 2016, the plan was updated, we had 15 different islands within the city, basically areas of county unincorporated area that were completely surrounded by the city. And those ranged in size from like a larger subdivision all the way down to 1 or 2 parcels, a house on it. And since that time, we've been able to annex all of those areas, and that island annexation issue has gone away. That's for efficiency of service and everything else, part of that process.
Which, goal are you seeing that in, so I can make sure to?
I read through these, but I don't remember, I was just trying to find it by skimming through here, and I'm not seeing it at the moment.
Okay.
It's skimming.
Right.
Control that.
Control that.
On the
Yeah. Right.
Now, I would
But
state
it
that,
caught my attention, because it said annex.
yeah, so, and back to the island annexation thing very quickly. Our intent isn't necessarily to create islands when we annex lands. And what has happened in the past is, through the annexation approval process, Thurston County has the Boundary Review Board, and they're a separate group that reviews annexations, provides recommendations. Is the annexation properly sized? Should it include more? Should it include less? And they can make changes to the actual boundaries. And in some cases, that's where the islands came in, because people said, hell no, I don't want to be part of the city. And the Boundary Review Board at that time said, okay, let's carve you out. So I'm not going to necessarily say we're done with that issue, because we still have areas of the urban growth area to annex. But our intent is to create those things part of the process.
Thumbs up later, Commissioner. Then please bring it up.
I read it on the screen where I can blow up the print.
Ah.
Yeah.
Well, I'll find it.
Oh,
I know you
find
will.
it really easy to find.
She's real good at finding stuff, so.
That was, do you have anything more?
No, I think I just wanted to know if you had a chance to sort of go through what we had for the rest of the policies and goals and so forth. Similar in structure to the housing element. We've tried to identify the leads for the most part of it, for it's going to be community development staff. In the 2016 land use element, implementation actions were dealt with in two different ways. Similar to this format, there were some places where, under the policies, we identified specific actions the city would take to make the policy reality. Unlike any of the other chapters or the elements within the comp plan, the land use element also had a set of 16 very specific implementation actions identified in a separate section after all the goals and policies. We moved away from that model. You'll notice if you compare the current version to this version that a lot of those ideas, to be honest, are still good ones, and we still brought them over in various forms. But just be aware that there's a lot of different sources.
Commissioner Kirkpatrick.
The format of light blue, white, I found it confusing. In trying to, I would look at a policy, and it would be light blue, and then the next policy would be in white, and then it would help me if all the policies were in one color and all of the actions were in one color. I know you tried to do this by bolding one, but the bolding in the blue doesn't show up. So you can't really differentiate
Yeah.
No, and I think
between those that are bolded and those that are not bolded.
I think we're at the stage now where we could start to do that kind of formatting for the documents. We're putting this together, we're sort of like, we just need to build the tables. We'll use this basic format to start it off with and then go from there. But I think I see your point. We're gonna have to experiment a little bit, I think, to make sure that it's not just one big block of policies. We have some clear distinction between them, but I do like the idea of sort of color coding the actual boxes for this is an implementation action, this is a policy.
One of the things that I know I appreciate is the period column. You know, is it gonna happen all the whole time during the life of the plan, or are there milestones or points at which something will occur or is anticipated to occur? You know, that's helpful, I think, to any, member of the public or other users of the plan, development community, whatever, to know when to expect certain things to unfold as best we can.
I agree with that, and I would note, however, that obviously you'll notice a lot of CDD responsibilities.
Ongoing.
And whether that is truly useful in this case, I think is something to be thinking about.
Yeah.
When we're dealing with, say, the climate element or
For
even the
sure.
housing element, where we have multiple departments within the city that will have some role to play, it makes more sense. Maybe not so much here. And in a lot of the things dealing with land use, the period of time is pretty much the term of the plan, with some exceptions for some of the implementation things. So how to think about that actually works for this particular element versus another one, we're open to suggestions.
Trained us well with all the others. I'm used to it.
Yeah.
But then Terry comes in with the blue isn't good enough.
But it wasn't on the old one, so,
This is the first time I recall seeing that.
yeah.
Just
Terry's right.
alternating
Where the,
colors.
where the policies and the activities are not the same color. I've seen it before, I apologize, but this was the first time I've seen it.
Unless you've seen your idealized reality, which doesn't match actually what paper is. I'm pretty sure we've been alternating the.
Somebody doing a quick table in Word real quick.
I think it's just, you know, it's alternating, trying to make sure that.
Default style, alternating.
I
Yeah.
understood why it was done, but
Yeah,
to me, it was confusing.
yeah.
It was done initially just to pull them out so you could read each of the things separately. Now,
Lines
we did that first level. Now, does that actually still work, or do we need to sort of refine that further? Is definitely.
Are there other ways to differentiate each goal and its action items? I mean, is there a heavier border, you know, for each of those? You know, there are several different formatting things that we can play with, like Brad mentioned, that we can pull it up.
Let me go to those online and just check in and make sure we're not leaving you out of the conversation. Are either of you online?
I'm
Mr.
just
Kotecha or
listening. I'm just taking it all in.
Edward?
Same here, yeah.
Okay, great.
Another thing I want to point out in the draft is we've been also trying to, for each of the goals and policies and implementation action, is sort of call out where they came from. In a lot of cases, they were existing things that we had. In some cases, they were combinations of that. And in some cases, they're brand new things. And so I think that, let me know if that's helpful, or if you need more information. What our idea is to try to trace the path, rather than do an edit and strikeout version, which would be totally unreadable. We wanted to have another step there, just to show what has changed and what hasn't.
Was there anything that was either stricken because it's obsolete, it's already accomplished, it's a dud, whatever? I mean, is there stuff like that?
Well, the islands need to be struck in.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, there were things that we accomplished that have been struck. What we can do is, as part of the explanation of where things come from, is bring back what was deleted table that we had when we brought out the original.
Or maybe a discussion of, look at what we accomplished during the last.
We actually accomplished something. Yeah, no, we are future focused. We don't pay attention to what happened.
And they're done that, move on.
We're on the move
It
on
might be
side.
helpful to
Even
know, you
celebrate
know,
what you
that we're building upon the
No, that is-
past steps.
That is contrary to my background of studying history in college and all that. I don't want to be tied down.
Okay. Okay, it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. We're building on a long history of trying to plan for the city.
Mhm.
And that brings up a good point, because one thing that we have found when we were going back through the land use element, in particular the neighborhood appendix, is that there's a lot of history in the document. Now, whether or not that is truly something that we need to keep as part of a land use element versus, say, a historical document, is something that we're trying to work through.
I have ideas. Timeline,
We can definitely do
Yep.
timelines.
graphic. Yep.
But we have a lot of text, is what I'm saying.
Yes. I have an idea to hopefully bring that document, those descriptions, from, I think, an average of 8 pages down to 2. Heavily graphic, heavily, almost like an infographic of each of the neighborhoods. So working on that right now.
Today I had 2 big meetings, and one was with the Tumwater School District Strategic Planning. That facilitator was able to put everything into 4 pages, right? Very graphic for the public distribution. Actual plan is gonna be 40 pages. And that's so real talent. To be able.
after we adopt the plan, we have a lot of goals and aspirations about making it more consumable.
How long have you been here now?
4 months?
3 years. Exactly, so.
Okay, no.
Brad says it's 4 years.
Well, it's what it feels like working together.
Yeah, she's been 4 months.
No, but the other really important
I'm running
thing
away.
that Dana has, obviously, Dana's skills in terms of communication and saying, why are you putting it that way, nobody's gonna read it, and other polite suggestions are very important, obviously, if we want these documents to be used in the future. So the things she's bringing up are definitely things that we would like to do. The other thing that she has really strongly suggested, which I think is a great idea, is a lot of signposting within the document about, at the beginning of a section saying, and just a couple lines saying, this is what this does. And this is why this is important, that kind of thing. So as we're sort of taking the document from just the text and we got everything in the right place mode of developing the document to developing it into a more readable document, I think that's the direction we'll be going. And that's why we hired her in the first place, and that's why we're so happy she decided to stay.
So far.
Well, cool if, you know, one of the outcomes of the update is that it's an easy enough, document to understand that, you know, newcomers who weren't here through the process of anything can easily pick it up and find out what's going on. I realize that's a kind of a pie in the sky kind of thing. People don't just go and say, where's that comp plan? I just have to read it. But, you know, but one could. And then, you know, it would be the jumping off point for somebody who was interested or wanted to get engaged somehow.
You're
It's your meeting.
You're first.
The tricky thing, especially for the goals and policies, in terms of making them more condensed, is that they each have specific meaning. And so, and you're helping us to make them significant and make sure they're significant. And so reducing them too much can be also very detrimental because we're putting goalposts out there and making sure the wording is such that we can measure that goalpost is pretty critical, especially when we have the 5-year report to do.
One of the things we talked about a little over a year ago, I think, was exactly this, and how do we kind of make this more digestible and to get it out there? And I think we threw that out there into the ether, and you came tumbling in. So I think that's what happened. So we're-
Careful what you wish for, guys.
Yeah, we're very pleased with that, because this is something we did talk about. We just, none of us could really make it happen. So I just want to say thank you. 'Cause
Fingers crossed, I mean, it has yet to occur, so.
we have positive thoughts on this, so thank you.
I did find the annexation, and I, had obviously read it more than what it says. So it just says, to be sure that
That we're not creating islands.
adhere to policies, and to monitor the new annexations for.
Right. And I'm, yes, it was familiar to me because I thought I had scrubbed the language to remove that, so. Go, Dana.
Mr. Kirkpatrick.
Yes, I heard the word neighborhood, so I just want to make sure, that when we say neighborhood in any of these policies or activities, we are referring to the neighborhoods that exist in the current, comprehensive plan, the
Absolutely.
neighborhoods of Tumwater. And is that going to appear in the definitions?
That's actually a really good point. And thank you for bringing that up, because again, when we talk about the neighborhoods, there are the sub-districts of the city, but they're not necessarily, this is my neighborhood, which can be at a much smaller level, you know, your housing development or whatever. It's a much bigger area than that. And it's something we've been kind of struggling with and trying to figure out, well, is this truly a neighborhood, or is this sort of just a convenient way of fitting together? But yes, we will be very clear on when we say neighborhood, this is what we need in the context of this document.
That's the way I read it. And you will put it in the,
We will. And if we don't, please politely remind us to.
And if the word neighborhood doesn't reflect those and we need to change that, we could use something different like planning unit. Neighborhood is more friendly, I know. But when we think about, again, one of my post-implementation projects is to go and talk about what this plan does. And to talk about it in each neighborhood makes the most sense to me. To gather that neighborhood around their plan, their land use, and their goals. Not to say that they're separate from Tumwater, not to confuse things, but to create some sense of identity around that and to gather their sense of onus and, belonging. Oh, yeah, there's a neighborhood map. It's in the,
it'll come up online.
it's in the current. Yep, you have to look in the appendices.
More neighborhoods without, bus transportation than there are with.
I believe that.
Those kind of general stats is also something we could, include. That would be interesting.
Good.
Yeah.
So for your next steps on the land use side, our intent is to bring this back with the second part complete for your June 10th meeting. The thought is that the meetings in May and June will basically this is what the elements look like just before we put them all together into the one document. It's sort of like make sure that we've got the general formatting, the general ideas into these documents.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we transition in the late summer into the fall, we'll be taking a look at the document as a whole, much more as a whole. And you'll see it as one unit rather than individual elements. And the SEPA process, the environmental review process will also start in late August, in taking into account the whole document.
We're still on target to conclude
By the end of my lifetime.
So soon.
So soon, yes.
No.
Well, it's either going to be a really short project
I saw a hand up. Commissioner Kirkpatrick, or? Nope. Okay. All right. Good job. It looks like our next meeting on the 22nd, we're gonna do food system plans. Okay. Very good.
At that point, we should have a draft of the community assessment for you. That's the goal.
Brad, you mentioned back in your remarks that you're the transportation manager position. Do you have a link for that in case we did want to forward that to folks? Send it out, that'd be great. Folks, any last remarks? Motions?
Motion to adjourn for the evening?
Commissioner Smith, seconded by Commissioner Kirkpatrick. It's been moved and seconded to adjourn our meeting tonight. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Our meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody?
Brad, be careful in the parking lot.
I,
Like,